My name is Trace Akins. I'm from Moultrie, Georgia. To be an organ donor, it would make my family really proud to see something of me live on in someone else. I want my legacy to be me being there for someone who really needs me and helping someone out that really needs help, hoping that they will continue that legacy within themselves and do that with their friends and family.
When you become an organ and tissue donor, your story continues. LifeLink. Register today at mystorycontinues.com.
Most weight loss plans are one size fits all, not taking into account each person's individual needs. Noom is here to change that. Noom Weight uses psychology. That's why they say losing weight starts with your brain. But it also takes into account your unique biological factors, which also affect weight loss success. The program helps you understand the science behind your eating choices and why you have cravings. Everyone's journey is different, so your daily lessons are personalized to you and your goals. One of the great things about Noom is that it's nourishing instead of restrictive. They focus on progress instead of perfection. You don't have to give up carbs, or anything for that matter. Have cravings? Food FOMO? Noom can help you lose weight while still enjoying your favorite foods. To date, Noom has helped more than 5.2 million people lose weight. Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com.
This is Life Admin Life Hacks, a podcast that gives you techniques, tips and tools to tackle your life admin more efficiently, to save your time, your money and improve your household harmony.
I'm Dinah Roberts, an operations manager that's always embraced meal planning to help me deal with the complexity of the various dietary requirements of the members of my household.
I'm Mia Northrop, a researcher and writer who is just thrilled to discover the term for my new tummy tire is menopause. Hello and welcome to Life Admin Life Hacks. Listeners, one of the areas you've asked for help with is meal planning in households where everyone wants to eat something different because of different preferences or needs to eat something different due to different dietary restrictions. And navigating that alongside your own food preferences if you're trying to manage your weight or deal with perimenopause and the different impact food has on your body.
So in this episode, we reached out to interview an expert, accredited practicing dietitian Annie Barry, who talks with us about how to plan meals that help you glow, grow and go, balancing the whole food with soul food and foods to embrace to support the perimenopause transition. If you want a reality check on what healthy eating is really about, then listen on.
This episode is brought to you by our signature program, The Art of Adulting. Our next intake of members is in February, and each month we bring you masterclasses and mindset sessions to help you get on top of life admin and stay on top.
Our topics include time management, decluttering, organising digital photos, plus setting up your foundational life admin tools.
There's also weekly co-working sessions where you can do your hour of power alongside other members from our private community for extra motivation and accountability.
This is a monthly membership that meets you where you are with sessions and resources for those wondering how to begin and those who just want to consistently follow through and the support to stay organised. Head to lifeadminlifehacks.com to check it out and jump on the waitlist.
Annie Barry is an accredited practicing dietitian, health coach and habit change practitioner who is passionate about pushing back against diet culture and a firm believer that life's too short to skip the wine or the joy of eating your favourite food. Hurrah! Annie runs All Round Wellness, an online consulting business where she provides a 12-week individually tailored coaching program to help women regain control of their weight, mood and energy without restrictive eating. Whether you're getting peri-ready or have already hit the menopause transition, Annie is on a mission to help women work smarter, not harder, when it comes to their health and nutrition.
Oh, Annie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I am a little bit of a fangirl of you guys. I feel like it's a real coup to be on the podcast.
Look, as Mia said, you've worked in this space for, more than 15 years across private practice, community health, everything. Let's start. How did food get so complicated?
Interesting, because for me, it is all about simplifying things. And I really just think it's also about the amount of inputs and messaging that we get. We used to learn about food maybe from our teachers at school or a little bit at home. And now we have, TV, we've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got audiobooks. There is so much input. That massive increase in input obviously means that there's going to be very broad opinions. And now we're exposed to the entire spectrum through our range of sort of options of seeking information. And I think that, we're just kind of lost in the middle of it all at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like every time you jump on social media or you listen to the radio or news program or whatever it is, you're hearing about some new food ideology. And it's confusing. It's confusing to know, is there research behind this? Like, what's the truth? What is the latest research on what is actually a healthy way to eat?
I think we can really simplify things. And look, we've got our Australian dietary guidelines, and they're actually not a bad place to start. And, people have been arguing about whether they're right and whether they're wrong, but reality is that 90% of Australians don't follow them anyway. And so how do we even know if they're right or wrong? So, we do have some really basic, great guidelines. We talk about our core food group, the types of foods that we need to be eating on a daily basis, and, the different requirements that we might have at different ages and stages. These guidelines are being reviewed at the moment, and we'll probably have a new sort of release, I think, 2024. But, just looking at your basic 5 food groups, which you've got your fruits, your vegetables, your grains and cereals, your meat or meat alternatives, and then your, dairy foods or plant alternatives. It's a really good place to start.
I didn't know we had Australian dietary guidelines. The food pyramid. I'm assuming it's not the food pyramid and that we've come away from that, because didn't that kind of get debunked? It's not really...
It's a version of. But I mean, the basics of our dietary guidelines are around sort of eating more from our core food groups and less of our discretionary foods, which are going to be those foods that are high in sort of added sugars and saturated fat, alcohols, those sorts of things.
So it's still very much sort of eating a wide range of unprocessed food, like food that's as close to its normal source, its original source as possible. Is that what you're talking about? And the discretionary foods are all those refined things? And
yeah. So there's a really nice Michael Pollan quote, which is, I think it's eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I really love that because it really kind of simplifies things. So I think that we have unnecessarily complicated things. And just to give you some really interesting stats, like 90% of Australian adults are not eating enough vegetables. And I think around sort of over 50% are not eating enough fruit. So if we're kind of looking to really simplify things, those stats can be really powerful.
Yeah. So what is enough vegetables and enough fruit? What do the guidelines say we should be eating?
So this is where our 2 and 5 comes in. So it's around 2 serves of fruit, and a serve is about a piece of fruit, or little fruits like apricots would be 2. 2 apricots would equal a serve, and 5 serves of veg. So a serve of veg is roughly a cup of salad veg or half a cup of veg. So how I normally sort of translate this to my clients is that we need to be eating vegetables at least 2 occasions or 2 meals across the day if we're going to be getting close to meeting our serves.
And so is that what we're all getting wrong? Is that like the biggest thing that Australians are getting wrong when it comes to eating well and managing our weight? Is it kind of the fruits and veggies, or is it more complicated than that?
It's a really big one. So probably what I would say is the biggest one is that our intake of those discretionary foods that I mentioned before. So they're sort of foods that are not needed to meet our nutrition requirements and tend to be quite high in calories and our saturated fats, sugars, salts, etc. Our intake of these discretionary foods is too high. So I think the stats sort of sit at around kind of 30% of our intake are these discretionary foods. And it doesn't mean that there's not room for these foods in a balanced diet. It's just that our current intake is too high, which means that then, okay, if we're filling our intake with these foods, what are we missing out on? And we're definitely missing out in terms of our plants, so our fruits and vegetables, which means that our fibre is going to be taking a hit as well. The other thing is also that when we're thinking about sort of our fruits and cereals and grains, get a bad rap at the moment, particularly, with the popularity of diets like keto, is that we're probably sort of consuming too many refined cereal products rather than sort of getting in really fibrous whole grain products as well. So I think it's sort of that combination of increased discretionary food and not enough from our core food groups.
Okay. And I guess one of the things that we're also getting lots of messages about, it's not just what to eat in terms of whether you're going like Mediterranean diet or keto or paleo, or one of my cousins is doing carnivore right now. And I'm like, I don't even want, like experiment away, see what works for you. But it's also about when to eat. So there's all this talk about different types of fasting, whether it's time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting or circadian fasting. There's so many different sort of flavors. What do you think is worthwhile exploring when it comes to that kind of, when to eat strategy?
It's a really good question. And the first question that I'll always ask is, for what? Because people are like, oh, is fasting good? I'm like, for what? For weight loss, for how you feel, for sleep, for, so it really comes down to what your goals are and what you're trying to get out of the process. In terms of fasting for weight loss, it's not any more effective or less effective than other methods. And so, if it's something that suits you, then that's fine. In terms of sort of general health and well-being, again, it comes down to the individual. A good example that I often have is that for women who might exercise or train in the morning, is that, potentially we don't, depending on the intensity of what you're doing, you might not want to be doing that fasted because you're not going to get the appropriate performance. And so that's an example of where something like an intermittent fasting, where you're fasting throughout the morning, might not suit you. As a general guide, I think it's great for us to have a decent break, particularly overnight, where we're not consuming food. So it can be problematic for some of my clients. They might be snooking sort of late into the evening, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and then having an early breakfast when they wake up, which means that the body really doesn't have much time where it's sort of resting and recovering. So, I think sort of generally speaking, as a kind of realistic guide, I would suggest if we can get 10, 11, 12 hours across the evening where we're not eating, then I think that that's a really positive thing. In terms of sort of adding in additional hours of fasting or having fasting days, that will come down to the individual and their goals.
And in terms of, the timing of meals, there's kind of, what's that old saying? It's like you breakfast like a king, you have lunch like a queen, and I'm totally destroying it, and then you have dinner like a pauper.
Yeah.
Is that still, is there science behind that in terms of saying, yes, you should have your bigger meal earlier in the day and kind of, taper, I guess, so that you have that big break overnight, your body can heal and restore itself? Is there truth in that?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that that's sort of something that particularly for women sort of in the perimenopause, menopause transition, but I think this is definitely something that we would look to heed in terms of making sure that we're starting the day with a really protein breakfast. There is some theory behind sort of, I guess, going a little bit lighter at night in terms of saving sort of more of our carbohydrate distribution. So things like the convenient breads, our rice and pastas, saving those for a little bit earlier in the day or around the time of day when we're most active, and perhaps going a little bit lighter at night. The thing for me, though, is always bridging the gap between what's perfect and what's practical. Because for some people, that's the time, evenings, when they sit down and they have a meal with their family. And so it's about sort of trying to balance all of those things as well. So I think sometimes good enough is good enough. And if it's not perfect, then that's okay. So it's just finding that middle ground between sort of what's scientifically perfect and what's practical for people in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there are so many, health podcasts I listen to, and they'll say, oh, this is a great way to eat. And I'm like, what does that actually look like for a family when you're having breakfast in 20 minutes and trying to get kids out the door? And there's probably, you might not necessarily be cooking like a cooked brekkie. It's likely to be porridge or cereal or, something that gets them out pretty quickly. Then you're packing stuff in a lunchbox that's got a certain size, and you want things to stay, not go off during the day in terms of what you can put in the lunchbox that's not going to be refrigerated. And then, you have your family meal when you can actually sit down and slow down and perhaps spend more time on cooking. It's actually kind of, the rhythm in the household is kind of actually flips that entire idea of when you would have your bigger meal and when you would taper those things. How do we reconcile sort of what's potentially most healthy for us versus the way that we actually live?
just sort of making some small tweaks and changes, you know. So I mentioned sort of having a nice protein-packed breakfast doesn't mean that you have to sit down and have a nice cooked eggs and spinach and mushies and a bit of toast, you know. That there's nice and quick ways that we can do that. And same again, sort of thinking about evening meal. This is where some small tweaks can come in terms of making some small substitutions, or perhaps just the way that you portion the meal out on your plate might be slightly different to, you know, other members of their household. So it's just sort of, again, this is sort of what I do with my clients. Often people think that it's delving deep into the science of what we do. Yes, you know, that's part of it, but it's also like, okay, when are you making lunch? And exactly that, like I had a client who gets the tram to work and she didn't want to carry 400 containers to work. So we had to figure out how to make her lunch nice and compact, but we're still going to meet her needs. So half of what I do is just kind of talking through all of these logistics, life admin hacks for eating.
Yep. It's an industry.
Yes.
So what do you have for breakfast, Annie? What would you suggest that people do if they don't have time for the eggs and the bacon and the spinach and the mushrooms? What is a good protein-packed brekkie?
So preference, I'm been smoothie obsessed for a while now. So smoothie is my go-to, but also, you know, I understand smoothies are not also appealing for people in winter. So basically we can turn anything into a higher protein option. So, you know, this is where some products, sometimes like protein powders, can be helpful. I don't sort of necessarily suggest that people kind of sweep protein drinks all day, every day. But perhaps, you know, supplementing with something like a protein powder or a higher protein yogurt can turn something like a porridge or a cereal into a breakfast that's then higher protein. There's also options as well. There's higher protein breads that don't make great sandwiches, but aren't too bad in the toaster as well. So that then, you know, we can have, if you like, just Vegemite and toast in the morning, we can turn that into a higher protein option. So there's lots of sort of different ways. But I mean, I love breakfast foods, but we can turn cereal, toast, porridge, oats, smoothies into a really sort of nourishing breakfast pretty easily with a few small tweaks.
What do you have for breakfast, Dinah, these days? I love getting into the nitty-gritty of what is actually everyone eating.
I do actually have eggs quite a lot. You know, if my morning has gone to plan, that's what I will have. Or I will have toast with Vegemite on the days that I'm in a hurry. And what about you, Mia? You have some production line, don't you, where you prepare your breakfast in advance?
I do. I have these little pots that I put yogurt and nuts and seeds and some berries in, and I make a big batch of that on the weekend. Like I just stand there and line them all up and dole it all out. And I have that. But we have eggs a lot. I make eggs for the kids in the morning. I'll have scrambled eggs or a soft-boiled egg and some bacon and some toast, or they'll have porridge. And I think what's worth considering is that actually cooking a breakfast like that does not take as long as you think. Like it might feel like it's a big production and, we couldn't possibly be like cooking brekkie. It takes like 15 minutes. So I think when we've got, you know, I know exactly what the kids like. I stop asking them what they want for breakfast because it's just like I know what they like. Unless it's the weird weather and they're in funny moods, try and introduce some variety and just like, we're having baked beans today, we're having eggs today, you know, it's porridge today. And then on the weekend, it's a car crash of waffles and pancakes. And we have bacon with it, so there's some protein in there. Yeah, it doesn't often take as long as you think to make something that's a bit more substantial.
Yeah, and I do find that a lot. It's often the perception of sort of the difficulty or the time required for a task. And same again for cooking dinner. Sometimes it's perceived that it will be quicker to get takeaway. Actually, when you break it down, by the time you've ordered it and you wait for it or you go pick it up, you know, you probably could have done a really nice.
Oh, yeah, you totally could have.
Sometimes sort of then breaking it down so that we've got some really quick, easy backup options so that feels easy. If it feels easy, we'll do it. If it feels hard, we won't.
Yeah.
So maybe we should chat a bit more about meal planning. So Mia and I are huge fans of meal planning.
Yeah. It's one thing that does start to make things feel easier.
Yeah, and it definitely does. You know, if you are thinking about mixing up your breakfasts and things, you kind of do need to do that planning so that you make sure you've got the right ingredients and you've got the right headspace. But if you're a single person, is it worth meal planning?
Absolutely. We all experience the same thing in the sense that we get to the end of our day, we've already made a billion decisions during the day, and then we've got that sort of mental fatigue and what the heck am I going to cook for dinner? So family, single, whoever, I do think that, having systems in place when it comes to meal planning is really important. I think it's also really important to acknowledge that planning and meal planning can look really different for everybody. We don't sort of all need to have that Instagram perfect fridge where all our meals for the week are nicely prepared in containers. There's lots of sort of different types of meal planning that you can do. And it's, as always, for me with my clients, it's about matching the right strategy to the right person. Just sort of not getting stuck in that one size fits all, but there's a couple of different things that we can do. So, we could think about, meal planning could be cooking a whole meal, or it could be chopping up some ingredients, or it might be just marinating some meat or some protein so that you've got, the components of the meal ready to go. It might be using meal kits like HelloFresh or Marley Spoon, or it might be getting your meals fully cooked and delivered, ready to go, So it really depends on your preferences and your budget and what's going to work for your household.
Yeah, it's nice to sort of take that wider perspective with meal planning and know there's a few different levers you can pull to add that convenience and ease into your week. And thinking about, how many meals am I doing? Is it breakfast, lunch and dinner? Is it every day? Is it some of the days? Is it full bulk meal prep, or just thinking about just having an idea of what you're going to cook on a day and knowing that you've shopped and you've got the ingredients, that gets you halfway there. At least there's food in the fridge and there's a plan for how you're going to use it, which is certainly not the way that I used to operate. I used to have like the 5 o'clock freakouts. What's for dinner? What's in the thing? And I was married to someone who could do like the super chef thing. Or what was that show? Surprise Chef?
Ready, steady, cook. Well, you got like
some random ingredients, make something happen. And he could do that. I can't operate like that.
Yeah, that's my super skill too. Well, my partner's the gourmet cook and I'm the, okay, crap, we haven't got anything. What can we make out of the pantry sort of person?
I feel like are there fridges now where you can just type it, or you can type it into ChatGPT and say, this is what I have. What can I cook? And ChatGPT will tell you.
And I mean, I think then the next thing to talk about is like, how do you meal plan when you've got people in your family who have all different kinds of eating requirements? So you might have people who are celiac and so want to be gluten-free, lactose intolerant, other intolerances. And actually, I've got my in-laws coming to stay with me shortly who one gluten-free, one type 1 diabetic. And it always does freak me out a little bit about, how am I going to adjust our meal plan to kind of suit them? So how can we approach this in a sustainable way when you've got all of these different dietary requirements?
It's a really great question, and it comes up a lot with my clients, sort of people freaking out like, oh gosh, my partner's got high cholesterol and my kid doesn't like this, and now I've got to watch my weight. Like, am I cooking 3 separate meals?
Yeah, this is the question we get a lot.
So what I often start with is just helping people understand the components of a balanced meal, because then once you understand the framework, then it's a little bit easier to sort of mix and match or swap things in and out. So this is also something that we can talk to our kids about as well. So I get people to usually just think about their plate and put it into 4 quarters or 4 quadrants. So 2 of those quadrants, or half the plate, could be our vegetables or salad. This is where our plants are coming in. A quarter of the plate is based around our protein. So that could be things like meat or chicken, fish, eggs, or it could be things like tofu or tempeh, lentils or legumes. And then the quarter of the plate is our carbohydrates. So this is things like our rice, our pasta, grains, breads, wraps, or sort of more of our starchy veg. So think like your potato or your sweet potato. So once we've sort of got that framework, then what we can do is have a look at, okay, are there, in terms of preferences, do we have kind of shared preferences around protein? Does the whole family like chicken? Great. Does everybody like rice? Great. Okay, what veggies do we have? And so having that framework can be really helpful in terms of understanding how we split things in. The other thing is that this framework can be used for kids as well. So we might just change the proportions slightly, like they might have a third veg, a third protein. And we can talk to them the way that I usually sort of frame that, instead of talking about proteins, carbs and fats, is that we can talk about our go foods, which are our carbs, our fuel. our grow foods, which are our proteins, and our glow foods, which are our plants, which help us glow from the
Ooh, I am writing this down.
So it's a bit of a tongue twister, go, grow, and glow. But it's just also nice that if you want to have that conversation about sort of food, that's some nice language that you can use. But also it just shows that the framework can be applied to different people at different ages and stages. It's just that the proportions might change slightly for kids. When we're thinking about adults, the portions might be slightly bigger. You would still use that sort of framework. Me, as a smaller female with a desk job, my energy needs aren't huge. Whereas if your partner is a builder on their feet all day, or somebody works at a hospital moving around on their feet all day and clocks up the kilometres, then their energy needs might be greater. Using that framework first off means that you know that in a balanced meal, we've got our protein, we've got our plants, and we've got our carbohydrates. Do we have sort of shared options? So, for example, in terms of making a change for a vegetarian dish, the rest of the family's having chicken, you could sub out some marinated tofu, and then you've still got that nice sort of homework. I think the issue is sometimes when we're trying to adapt meals, we remove a category. So, for example, vegetarian eating, often what we do is that we remove the meat protein, but we don't necessarily replace it, and we just increase the portion. So we know we're going to be nailing our nutrition if we're using that framework. So what you can have a think about is the different proteins that you might use in your household, different carbohydrates, the different veggies, and that sort of can be a really good way to start.
Are there plates out there that have like portions on them? Like have the quarters?
Yeah, there are. They do exist. I'd say some people, some of my clients have bought those in the past and they like them. But I mean, it's a basic enough sort of visual that you can use. We don't necessarily need to be measuring or weighing everything, but just having that sort of rough framework in mind, you can eyeball the plate, and it's a really good place to start. The other thing that I would really encourage people to do is, I'm not going to sort of go over all of the meal planning techniques because you guys have already outlined some really great strategies. But the other thing I'd really encourage people to do is write things down. Like if you've got some family meals that everyone's like, oh, that's great. Write it down, add it to the list, and start to create your own sort of meal Bible. Because I know personally, like I go blank. When I'm on the spot and thinking about cooking something, it's like tumbleweeds. I can't think of anything that I've ever cooked or enjoyed before. Whereas some of my clients might just have phone notes or even Excel or a Google Doc where they just note down what the favorite family meals are. And over time, they can sort of build up their repertoire. Whereas I think sometimes we forget about it and then remember it 4 years later and go, why did I stop cooking it?
You know what? That's when those HelloFresh recipe cards come in handy, because every time we had one of them that it was a hit, I'm like, I'm keeping that one.
Yeah.
And I still have a stack. Of them that were successful. And I literally have a thing in my meal plan at the moment that's called Chicken Dinner Winner, because everybody loved it and raved about it. And they're like, we have to remember what this combo was so we can replicate it. It's the Chicken Dinner Winner. Oh, funny.
I do think that that's really helpful, just having your own sort of creating your own recipe book, I guess, of family favorites and go-tos. And also then sort of noting down where you can make some substitutions to account for different dietary requirements.
Yeah, and if you want to go digital with that, I highly recommend the Paprika app. I don't know if you've used it, but you can basically forward recipes to the app that you find on the web, and it will save it all for you, and you can put categories in and you can give it ratings out of stars and stuff. We use that in our house and it's very helpful.
Yeah, we use Paprika as well. Actually, we use a combination of things. We use sort of a Google Keep shared notes for our shopping list, and also that's where we'll jot down sort of what we're doing for dinner. We've also got a little whiteboard on the fridge, and we also use Paprika as well. So ours is a bit of a sort of mishmash of things, but it works.
Yeah, that's great. You've got to find the tools that work for you that are just convenient. Oh, I love that.
Well, many of our listeners are women who are experiencing perimenopause or menopause, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. But What sort of foods should those women who are in that stage of their life be thinking about in terms of things that might make symptoms worse or those sorts of things? Talk us through how you coach people who are facing this life change.
Yeah, it's a big one. And I feel like as women, the goalposts just continually shift throughout our life, and we just get used to one stage and settle in, and then the goalposts shift again. And that's sort of how I feel perimenopause, that transition is. What I will say is that, with the hormonal changes that come with perimenopause, like lifestyle interventions such as diet and exercise are really important, but they don't replace medical management. And so the first thing I'll usually say is make sure that you've got a great GP who understands perimenopause and menopause and can provide adequate support. In terms of sort of what happens during this time, like estrogen plays so many roles in the body. And as it declines, we do start to see some changes. And so that can impact things like our mass, particularly our visceral fat that sort of sits around our organs in that middle there.
I'm nodding vigorously. Nodding.
Menopause, which I don't love.
Menopause. Oh my God, that's awful. It's awful, and I have one. Oh my God. I just find it incredible, like, as you said, Annie, as women, you go through these different transitions with your body, and, if you've had kids, you go through pregnancy, you're like, oh, this is so fascinating. And then you get to this stage, you're like, this is so fascinating and bloody awful. With me and my menopause. Oh my God, keep going.
Look, female body is just bloody incredible. But I do think that we have to manage a lot, and menopause is another one of those things. So when it comes to, I guess, sort of lifestyle measures that we can take to support this transition, there's a couple of things. I'll touch on exercise briefly. Obviously, as a dietitian, exercise is not my area of expertise, but, it is really important at this time for a couple of reasons. One, we get this decline in muscle mass. And so it's really important that it is a case of move it or lose it. Like, we do need to be using our muscles to protect our muscle mass. It's going to affect things like our function, mobility, balance down the track. So making that investment now is important. And the other thing is that the research suggests that this is a time in our lives where we're less physically active. And it makes sense. We're often busy. We've got kids. We might have aging parents. We might be in the middle of our, careers. There's lots that we're juggling. And so, not to mention, if you're experiencing menopausal symptoms, you might not feel like exercising. So the research is suggesting that we are actually decreasing our activity at this point in time. So it's just something to note that this is really important to prioritize. And I guess I take a all or something approach, not all or nothing approach. Anything is good, however you can move your body.
Oh, I like that too, Annie. I'm writing that down too.
Sometimes we think that it's got to be grand and intense and, for it to have an impact. But reality is whatever you can fit in and whatever you can do will be great. In terms of nutrition, there's a couple of things that we want to think about. We've already touched on that, a couple of them. Protein and plants. We really want to be protein and plant forward for a couple of reasons. One, protein will help support that muscle mass that I talked about just before with that sort of age-related sarcopenia. We need to be making sure that we're getting in enough of our raw foods to support our muscles.
Oh, talk about a little bit more about sarcopenia. Whenever I hear that term, I just think of people's bottoms disappearing. It's just suddenly there's a flat pancake there. What happened to my muscles?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah. So, there's elements in terms of changes that come with aging, and there's elements that come with, I guess, some of the hormonal changes as well. So I guess that sarcopenia can happen just as a result of the aging process, the change in hormonal, but also as a result of being less active. And as I mentioned, this is a time in our life where we can become less active. So we do need to be, I guess, sort of fighting against it a little bit. So it is a combination of sort of age and hormone related changes along with a more sedentary lifestyle. It's always tough when you hear like, I can't blame everything on my hormones. I've actually got to do something. Exercise is going to be really important, and our protein intake will help kind of support that muscle mass. Also help. It's a really sort of satiating macronutrient, so it will help us feeling nice and full and satisfied. So we want to be protein and plant forward, and we really want to be pushing in fiber. There's a couple of things that change. A loss of muscle includes sort of loss of smooth muscle, which can affect our digestion. We can also get changes in our gut microbiome. And so this is where we want to be making sure that we're getting in lots of plants, lots of fiber, fermented foods as well. So some of our yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, those sorts of things. Because sometimes sort of symptoms of perimenopause can be digestive issues like bloating, diarrhea, constipation, excessive gas, all of those sort of awesome things. And so sometimes that can be as a result of changes through the perimenopause transition. Other things, we want to sort of be thinking about plant proteins as well. So really sort of embracing our legumes and lentils, and also some of our soy products as well. So edamame, tofu, tempeh. I know everybody kind of, when I say tofu, they're really but what I would say is there is a marinated tofu from the supermarket. There's already some flavor in there, and it can be actually a really quick and versatile protein. So keep an open mind, people. And a couple of other things are going to be our omega-3s. So perimenopause can also be a time of, I guess, a more of an inflammatory state. So estrogen is actually anti-inflammatory, and as our levels of estrogen decline, we can become sort of more in an inflammatory state. So thinking about things like our oily fish, so salmon, sardines, mackerel, there are some plant options. Last but not least, thinking about sort of our polyphenols that are going to be really helpful and protective. So these are things like anything like our berries, like think about your reds and purple sort of coloured things like our berries, red cabbage, olive oil, turmeric, ginger. So yeah, there's lots of considerations to make when it comes to our perimenopause transition. But also, if you remember that this also isn't too far away from the dietary guidelines that we talked about. So it's really just about maximizing our core food groups and minimizing our intake of those discretionary foods.
I do like you calling them discretionary foods because it makes it feel better than they're not bad foods, they're just discretionary.
Yeah, so look, I call them sort of soul foods really, or, treats or whatever sort of language works for you. Is that, there are foods or drinks that are good for the soul but aren't necessarily contributing to your, daily nutrition, and that's okay. If our intake is predominantly soul foods and not enough whole foods, then, that's when the balance is a little bit out of whack. So there's absolutely room for those things in our diets. It's just about getting the balance right.
What about alcohol, Annie, for people in perimenopause?
It's a really good question, and it's a really tricky one because, for people, particularly during this time, like alcohol can be a really nice outlet. It can be a really nice stress reliever. People might even be using it to help them get to sleep. But the realities of alcohol aren't great, particularly when it comes to perimenopause. It can exacerbate symptoms, particularly some of those vasomotor symptoms like sweating and hot flushes and things. The other thing is if we're, sleep can be an issue during these times, but alcohol generally is not. It might help us get to sleep, but it's not going to contribute to better quality sleep. Not to mention it can contribute to, I guess, sort of extra calories in our day and have the potential to contribute to weight gain. So again, it's not something that I say never do, but I do think that we do really need to moderate, and we do need to, in some cases, perhaps have a look at our relationship with alcohol as well. So, is it playing a role in terms of being a sleep aid or a stress manager, and having a look at some of the tools and strategies that we can use for those things instead.
Well, those are some really good tips, Annie. So I think that really is a really good way for us to finish up our episode for today. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Where can our listeners find you if they want to hear more?
So my website is allroundwellness.com.au, or I am on Instagram at healthy.habits.dietitian.
Oh, and Annie's also got a really great guide about how to make quick supermarket meals. So we'll make sure we link to that in the show notes as well.
Thanks for listening. Show notes for this episode are available at lifeadminlifehacks.com. And if you're a fan, please subscribe and share the love and tell a friend, or review us in your podcasting app. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.